As we predicted, this far right-wing Supreme Court has issued a ruling that it is going to allow those racist Texas congressional maps to move forward to 2026. Remember, Donald Trump called the governor of Texas and said he wanted 5 seats. The Department of Justice issued the letter claiming that Texas congressional maps were unconstitutional because race was a factor. And so he called a special session. The Republicans led it. Remember, the Democrats walked out. But we told y'all, and I hope all those Democrats in Texas, all those Democrats who punked out, who did not want to stay out, and they could have stayed out. Oh, we don't know how long they can stay out. And they said, well, we think if we do this and we come back and they pass the maps, then, we're going to be able to, the Supreme Court is going to freeze the maps in place. And even though there was a lower court ruling declaring that race was indeed a factor, the Supreme Court is going to allow it to move forward. And the Supreme Court has ruled. The Supreme Court has ruled that they said that the plaintiffs more than likely are not going to win on this particular merits of the case.
Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. So we got to talk about the Supreme Court getting ready to deliver more bad news to Democrats and liberals, or so they think, okay? Because yesterday we just talked about the Supreme Court dropping a bombshell on Democrats and their blue wave plans by allowing Texas to move forward with maps that Democrats claim are racist, okay? And they claim that the last maps, the 2021 maps that Texas drew were racist. And now Democrats are suing because of the new maps that Texas created, and they're claiming that they're racist as well too. So it's really damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? Basically, racist just means whatever Democrats disagree with, right? If Democrats disagree with what Republicans are doing, then it's racist, okay? Because, again, the old maps are racist, the new maps are racist, and because of that, Democrats are in full-blown panic about the Supreme Court allowing Texas to move forward with what they call racist maps, because apparently Democrats wanted to go back to the prior racist maps.
Here we are. Chris, in one of my former lives, I was not a lawyer, but I was the comms person and the senior advisor for what at one point was the largest funder of voting rights litigation in the country, the Priorities USA Foundation. And our lawyer that was leading that work at the time was Mark Elias. Now everybody knows Mark Elias Law Group. He is one of the foremost authorities on voting rights in this country. I will say what struck me about this particular ruling from the Supreme Court, and we should underscore that this is not a ruling on the merits. This ruling just says, oh, it's too soon. The map can stay for right now, and we can decide the underlying merits later, which I think is quite telling. But what also struck me here is that the court is essentially saying, oh, Texas said they drew this for partisan motives. And so we think that's okay. They're using partisan motives as a cover for racial gerrymandering. I believe, and Lisa Rubin can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe even the court in its unsigned majority ruling notes that gives California, right, as an example here, understanding that California has a case that is going before the Supreme Court that will be argued next week about these very things. California says it wasn't for racial reasons, it was partisan reasons in response to Texas. And the justices, the majority, is essentially saying that's okay. My concern is that there is a history of racial discrimination and racial gerrymandering and racial disadvantages when it comes to drawing maps in this country, particularly, not exclusively, but particularly in places in the South. If the Supreme Court is now giving a green light to say, well, if you say it's partisan motives and you don't say it's racial, we're going to take that on face value. And it allows racial gerrymandering, the literal disadvantages of people based on their skin color, cutting people up in terms of voting based on their skin color. I think that that's problematic in this country.
Yeah, Simone Sanders. You think that it is problematic to draw districts based off race, right? Racial gerrymandering is problematic, except liberals, Democrats, and including liberal Supreme Court justices argue in the Supreme Court case about the Voting Rights Act that, it is likely that this Supreme Court is going to take a sledgehammer to. They literally argue that, we actually do need race-based districts, right? We do need majority black districts, Because according to individuals like Ketanji Brown Jackson, being black is like being disabled. I'm not joking. This is what Democrats are currently arguing, while at the same time claiming that racial gerrymandering is bad, except when it's done to the advantage of Democrats.
That's right. And in the state of Louisiana, that analysis was conducted in the Nairn case. And it was clear that regardless of party, white Democrats were not voting for black candidates, whether they were Democrats or not. And we know that there is such a significant chasm between how black and white voters vote in Louisiana that there's no question that even if there is some correlation between race and party, that race is the driving factor.
Reason to think that a racial group is being treated
here too. You have proof of that here.
No, you don't. What you have here is that Republicans and Democrats are different. There's no
you have some that even white Republicans or white Democrats won't vote for black candidates.
Right, but if these were white Democrats, there's no reason to think they would have a second district. None. And so what is happening here is their argument is because these Democrats happen to be black, they get a second district. If they were all white, we all agree they wouldn't get a second district. That is literally the definition of race subordinating traditional principles.
I guess I'm thinking of it, of the fact that remedial action, absent discriminatory intent, is really not a new idea in the civil rights laws. And my kind of paradigmatic example of this is something like the ADA. Congress passed the Americans with Disabilities Act against the backdrop of a world that was generally not accessible to people with disabilities. And so it was discriminatory in effect because these folks were not able to access these buildings. And it didn't matter whether the person who built the building or the person who owned the building intended for them to be exclusionary. That's irrelevant. Congress said the facilities have to be made equally open to people with disabilities if readily possible. I guess I don't understand why that's not what's happening here. The idea in Section 2 is that we are responding to current day manifestations of past and present decisions that disadvantage minorities and make it so that they don't have equal access to the voting system, right? They're disabled. In fact, we use the word disable in Milligan. We say that's a way in which you see that these processes are not equally open.
Wow, incredible. Absolutely incredible. I just want you guys to understand how this works, right? Liberals, the analysts on BS Now, CNN, right, they will go on national television and boohoo, whine, and cry about racial gerrymandering, while at the same time arguing to the Supreme Court and having liberal Supreme Court justices argue as well too. No, actually, racial gerrymandering is necessary because black people are disabled, right? Apparently, being black is a disability in this country, according to a black Supreme Court justice, by the way. Not Clarence Thomas, okay? The guy that they claim is selling out black folks. But the liberal woman, right, the liberal black woman thinks that black people are disabled. And because white Democrats are so racist that they won't vote for black folks. So therefore, majority black districts are necessary, right? Democrats should be allowed to have racially drawn lines in red states to guarantee that black people have representation in Congress, okay? And it just so happens that these individuals are going to be black, which means that they're likely going to be Democrat because black people vote for Democrats at a 90% clip. Yes, that's what's going on here. That is the psyop, the scam that the liberal media and Democrats are running on the American people who they think are dumb, right? Out of one side of their mouth, they'll say, well, Republicans are being racist with gerrymandering, right? When it doesn't benefit them, right? But when it benefits them, we need racial gerrymandering. Why? Because again, that protects Democrat power and control. Everything is about Democrat power and control. So again, they're claiming we have a problem with partisan gerrymandering. That's also racist, but yet they love partisan gerrymandering and racial gerrymandering when it benefits them. That's how the game works. So we're going to see. Supreme Court likely going to deliver some bad news, somewhat bad news to Democrats when it comes to the Voting Rights Act. They just delivered bad news when it came to the Texas maps. Now, they're about to deliver more bad news, all right? Well, so it seems. We're going to see exactly what happens here because they just decided that they're going to take up President Trump's executive order regarding birthright citizenship, which, again, is a huge one. So without further ado, roll this clip because liberals are in full-blown panic over this. Take a look.
We have breaking news out of the Supreme Court. Let's go to our CNN chief Supreme Court analyst, Joan Biskupic, who is in the newsroom. What's happening, Joan?
Supreme Court just this minute, Brianna, announced it's going to take up challenge to President Trump's order lifting birthright citizenship. You might remember on January 20th, his first day in office, he took his Sharpie pen and he said, this is a big one. And what he did was he tried to eliminate the automatic birthright citizenship that all Americans have had for more than a century. And what that does, it goes to the 14th Amendment of the Constitution that says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. That means that anyone who's born here, Brianna, automatically becomes a U.S. citizen. And what Donald Trump's executive order tried to do was say anyone who was born of someone who was not here lawfully or who was here on some sort of temporary status, that person's baby would not automatically be a citizen. It's a very, it's probably of all the Trump actions that have been taken to date, Brianna, this one is the most challenging because what it does is it flies in the face of the 14th Amendment that was adopted in 1868, and it flies in the face of an 1898 Supreme Court precedent that said even if you were born of, in that case it happened to be a Chinese national, even if you were born of someone who was not here as a U.S. citizen, you definitely still have citizenship here in the U.S. Brianna.
Order that would be allowing a president to amend our Constitution, to change our Constitution by an executive order of the sitting president. That's what the Supreme Court would be setting up. Do you realize what the road would be for progressing on with that? If a president can change our Constitution by an executive order when the text of the Constitution could not be clearer, and the Supreme Court just says, yep, president can do that, it's over. We no longer have a constitutional society. It is over because what else can the president change by executive order? If the Supreme Court says, yeah, he can change the Constitution with an executive order, and not just citizens. So citizenship would clearly be up for grabs. You upset the president, you report something he doesn't want reported, okay, we're going to strip your citizenship because you're giving him that power. But everything else then, the whole Constitution becomes negotiable. Does the president think that we shouldn't apply the First Amendment? Does the president think we shouldn't apply the Second Amendment? What about if there's a president on there, MAGA, that you don't agree with? You want to give the precedent that they can change the Constitution just by an executive order? I cannot overstate the importance of this. Pay attention, and we need to be vocal about this. They are burning our Constitution. Go love your neighbor.
Lord Jesus, we can't get a freaking break. And so now the Supreme Court is agreeing to take up the case based on the merits. Unfortunately, because of the way this Supreme Court is currently set up, anytime they agree to hear a case, I'm like, we losing. We're losing it. We're losing. Because that's just the way it goes for most of the cases that they've been taking up. Not all. I'm not going to sit here and say all, but for most of them, they've been siding with y'all's president. So I can't imagine how they would in this case, but I don't know, y'all. I'm skeptical. Now, I am going to keep my eye on this, and I'm going to obviously keep you guys posted, but this is where we are. The Supreme Court is taking up the birthright citizenship case. I don't know why they wouldn't just decline to take this case on the grounds that this is already established law. Like, this is established. You're a citizen. It's in the Constitution. We're done. But again, I'm going to keep my ear to the streets for y'all. Stay tuned.
Yeah, so you seen that, you heard that. Full-blown panic from liberals and the left, right? Yeah, I mean, we all understand why, right? birthright citizenship is the crux of the Democrats and their immigration plans, right? In order to import more voters into the country, right? Having all these illegals come into the country, having kids that are citizens, right? Anchor babies, and then using that to allow illegals to get access to benefits, healthcare, food stamps, taxpayer dollars, welfare. Like, yeah, that's what they do, right? And they eventually become voters, okay, and they vote Democrat because they're grateful for all of the taxpayer dollars that Democrats gave them. Yeah, I mean, birthright citizenship really is a part of the pillar that holds up the Democrat Party, right? And how Democrats abuse our immigration system in order to maintain power and control. So if the Supreme Court actually strikes this down, which I highly doubt that they will, but I'm gonna tell you what I think is gonna happen. That's a huge, huge, huge deal. I mean, it will be the biggest win for conservatives since Roe v. Wade was overturned, right? And if this happens, okay, if the Supreme Court actually does strike down birthright citizenship, which I think is extremely unlikely, I'm gonna tell you guys what I think is gonna happen. But if they do, right, we better vote. We better vote, okay? Because liberals are going to lose their minds, okay? They're going to absolutely lose it, okay? And they will vote. They will vote. We saw what happened with Roe v. Wade. This is going to be 10 to 20 times worse, okay? I'm just warning people. When you get W's like this, these people, they lose it, right? They lose their minds. So I just want people to understand. But if you guys don't know, if you couldn't tell what my position is on birthright citizenship, yeah, I don't think that is actually really constitutional, right? I think that there's been a misinterpretation of the Constitution. One, because there was no such thing as illegal immigration when the citizenship clause was written, okay? And also on top of that, when you actually read the text, okay, that says, quote, subject to the jurisdiction of all persons born or naturalized in the United States of America, and subject to the jurisdiction, therefore, are citizens, right? That subject to the jurisdiction part, in my non-legal opinion, right, meant full political and legal allegiance, right? Not mere presence, physical presence in the United States of America, okay? So therefore, okay, in my view, tourists, foreign diplomats, foreign nationals, temporarily present, undocumented immigrants, yeah, they don't get birthright citizenship, right? Like that it just shouldn't be a thing, okay? And we know that it didn't apply to some groups of people because they actually had to pass a law in order to essentially give it to Indians, right? Who have a presence, a physical presence in the United States of America, right? However, it wasn't until I believe the 1920s where they actually said, no, if you are Indian and you're born like in the United States of America, like physically, right? Even on a reservation, you are still a citizen, which means that it literally did not apply to anybody physically born in the United States of America because, again, it didn't apply to Indians, right? Also, the framers of the 14th Amendment explicitly said that it did not apply to foreigners, right? For example, Senator Jacob Howard, the author of the Citizenship Clause, explicitly said on the Senate floor, quote, it will not, of course, include persons who belong to the families of ambassadors or foreign ministers and Indians not taxed, right? Quote, every person born within the limits of the United States and not subject of any foreign power, aka not the citizen of some other country, right? AKA does not have allegiance to another country. Citizenship is allegiance, right? You are the citizen of a country that you have allegiance to, okay? That's what citizenship is, in my opinion, right? And that's also why I'm against dual citizenship. I'm especially against dual citizenship for anybody serving in Congress, okay, or serving in elected office. You cannot have dual allegiance to a foreign country in the United States of America at the same time. And I don't care what country that is, right? Including that little country in the Middle East, right? That everybody likes to talk about so much. No, I do not think that those individuals who have dual allegiance, dual citizenship, should be allowed to serve in public office in the United States of America, especially in Congress, okay? So, yeah, I mean, I think there are plenty of reasons for why birthright citizenship, the interpretation of it, is incorrect. right? Or the citizenship clause, the interpretation of the citizenship clause is incorrect. Now, what I think is likely to happen is that I think that the Supreme Court is going to narrow birthright citizenship, but not fully overturn it. Okay, so they're probably going to focus on defining what subject to the jurisdiction thereof actually means, right? They're probably going to focus on that in order to basically, again, narrow birthright citizenship and clarify exactly what that really means in practice, which could take away birthright citizenship of children if their parents are in the United States illegally, right, or here temporarily, or again, not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States of America in whatever way the Supreme Court defines it, right? And that would uphold some parts of the president's order without explicitly overturning prior Supreme Court rulings, okay? And the second most likely outcome is that they strike down President Trump's order, but they say, hey, Congress needs to act, right? That Congress has to define this, right? And that this is a job for Congress. Now, again, I think that those are the two most likely scenarios here. I don't think they're just going to outright end the whole thing. I believe that it's likely that they're going to try to narrow it in some way. Again, focus on that part about jurisdiction, right? And what does that mean, right? So we're going to see what happens. But in the meantime, again, there's full-blown panic over this because birthright citizenship is a key part of the Democrat plan to maintain power and control in this country by abusing our immigration system. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.